I'm Wolf Blitzer at NATO headquarters in Brussels, and this is CNN.
This is CNN Breaking News.
Top of a brand new hour on CNN Newsroom. I'm Victor Blackwell in New York.
And I'm Don Lemon in Lviv, Ukraine.
Moments ago, President Biden met with leaders of the European Union in Brussels as part of today's historic emergency summit. The president is rallying the West behind a strategy to confront Vladimir Putin after Russia's invasion of Ukraine. During a news conference last hour, President Biden praised the West's unity in support of Ukraine, and he said that Russia should no longer be a part of the G20, a collection of the world's top economies.
Do you think that Russia needs to be removed from the G20?
On the latter point, my answer is yes. That depends on the G20. That was raised today, and I raised the possibility if that can't be done, if Indonesia and others do not agree, then we should, in my view, ask to have both Ukraine be able to attend the meetings.
Exactly a month after the Russian invasion began, President Biden is now convening with the leaders of all 30 NATO nations, the leading council of the European Union, and the G7 today. And he will be meeting with refugees in Poland tomorrow. At least he hinted at that.
And Victor, in conjunction with this trip, the U.S. unveiled its latest actions in response to the Russian invasion, including this: a plan for the U.S. to accept as many as 100,000 refugees, a pledge of another $1 billion in humanitarian aid for those impacted, and a new round of sanctions against 300 members of the Russian State Duma. Now, here in Ukraine, there are more signs that Ukrainians are fighting back for territory from the Russians. The mayor of Kherson, which had been Russian occupied, hoisted this enormous flag over the hall. At the same time, the onslaught continues. This is a scene at a shopping mall. This is in Kharkiv. A deadly Russian missile strike hit a location where people had been waiting to receive humanitarian aid, according to the regional governor.
Let's bring in now CNN senior White House correspondent Phil Mattingly. He's traveling with the president in Brussels. Phil, so walk us through more of what the president laid out in response to the first month of this invasion.
Yeah, look, if there's one overarching message to take away, and I think one overarching goal for U.S. officials from the president on down, coming into this kind of day of diplomatic sprinting through 3 different summits with all of the critical Western allies, it's that unity is by far the most important thing. And while that sounds easy or simple enough on paper, given the fact that each country has its own domestic equities, its own political issues, its own economies to work with, and given Russia's critical piece, serving as a critical piece, particularly on the energy side of things, for many of those European economies, keeping that group together, unified, not just for the near term, but for the long term, is considered critical in the response to, if not deter, which they certainly didn't, if not stop, which they certainly haven't, then at least make it a strategic failure over the long term. So that was kind of the overarching goal of the day, and I think the president laid that out very clearly. But the president also making clear that, as you noted, he wants to do anything he can to continue to isolate Russia, and that includes, in his personal view, kicking them out of the G20. It has echoes of what the G8 did, and now G7 did, back in 2014 when Russia moved to annex the Crimean Peninsula. Obviously, the membership is slightly different, more varied, more diverse when it comes to the G20 as well. But the president also weighed in on the threat of a chemical attack. It's been an issue that U.S. officials, Western officials have been grappling with over the course of the last several weeks, the concern growing palpably over the course of the last several days. The president not detailing any intelligence that he may have seen, but making clear if there is a chemical attack, there will be a response. As to what that response would be, the president said the nature of the response would be guided by the nature of the attack itself. But I think overall, what you hear from the president, what you hear from his team, is you laid out the sanctions. Obviously, they're being expanded. The efforts on military assistance, the efforts on NATO posture in Eastern European countries being expanded, growing exponentially over the course of the last several weeks. It's the humanitarian piece that I think is probably the most interesting. You've heard from Eastern European countries, Poland and the like, that they are overwhelmed at this point. Millions of Ukrainians have departed that country in fear over the course of the last 4 weeks. And there has been both public and a lot of private requests for the U.S. to do more. The president trying to step into that void now. 100,000 Ukrainians will be allowed to come to the United States through various legal pathways, more than $1 billion in humanitarian assistance. As you noted, the president hinting at meeting with refugees tomorrow when he goes to Poland to see it with his own eyes. That is going to be a really key component in the days and weeks ahead, given the fact that U.S. And their European counterparts, those officials, don't see any near-term end to this. However, they believe that as long as this goes, the most important element, whether it's humanitarian assistance, whether it's lethal assistance, whether it's the sanctions package, is maintaining unity going forward, and that is certainly something the president believes that at least he got out of today. Victor?
All right, Phil Mattingly for us there in Brussels. Phil, thank you very much. CNN Chief International Anchor Christiane Amanpour is also live at the NATO summit. Christiane, we know that President Biden hinted that he wants to meet with refugees when he goes to Poland. There have been questions if he'll actually meet with President Zelensky. If he goes to the border, what impact do you think that would have? And could Putin see that as an escalation?
No, I don't think an escalation for the U.S. president to visit a NATO country and to visit refugees. I think that would be, if he does, something totally natural and something that, you know, you could understand on a human level for sure. And to reiterate, of course, the countries surrounding Ukraine have taken the bulk of the refugees that have left, some 3 million or so far in just 1 month of this war. There are 10 million, according to the United Nations, displaced, most of them internally, trying to go from one bombed-out city to a safer one. But the countries, even the poor ones on the borders, have taken in so many refugees. Europe has given a real carte blanche to them, giving all sorts of residency, work permit, health benefits for an indefinite period of time while this war goes on. So I think that that is such a huge component to, you know, to what we're seeing happening on the ground in Ukraine.
Let's talk about the headline question of the day for NATO members. If Putin were to use chemical, biological, nuclear weapons in Ukraine, what would be the response? The president said that there would be a response. The nature of the response would depend upon the nature of the use. G7 leaders warned Russia against the use. You spoke with the spokesman for the Kremlin, Dmitry Peskov. Does it appear, or are there any indications that these warnings have any influence over whether Putin would make that call?
Look, you know, Dmitry Peskov got a lot of play when I tried to get him to rule it out, the use of a nuclear tactical weapon or whatever kind, since it was President Putin who started putting this thing on the table from the very beginning, warning of the worst kind of consequences you've ever seen in history if anyone tried to interfere with what he was up to in Ukraine. So Dmitry Peskov did not rule it out, talked about only if there was an existential threat to Russia. What is an existential threat to Russia? Couldn't get that out of him. But certainly here at this summit, NATO has reaffirmed that any attack on any of them by conventional or unconventional weapons would trigger an immediate full NATO response. When I tried to press on whether that would, you know, be the same if there was an attack of, let's say, chemical weapons in Ukraine, I did not get an answer. They're trying to maintain, you know, ambiguity around that. They're not going to tell us exactly what they're going to do. They want to keep that, you know, a strategic warning to Putin. So I think you will never get an answer on what they'll do. As President Biden said, the nature of the response will be measured by the nature of the attack. But it is very worrying, and the fact that they even have to deal with that and discuss that at a summit like this in 2022, it just speaks volumes about the unpredictability and the real difficulty of this battlefield. Having said that, of course, it's probably only because the Ukrainians are doing so well comparatively against a much more powerful military. And when I asked Secretary General Stoltenberg just a few minutes ago, he put a lot of that down, not just to the heart and the patriotism of the Ukrainians, but to the training that NATO has given Ukrainians since Russia first invaded them in 2014, and the amount of weaponry and defensive methods and means that NATO has supplied in the last month alone.
Yeah, and Stoltenberg also said that it's unlikely that there will be a full-fledged war between NATO and Russia in that conversation you had with him. Christiane Amanpour, thank you. President Biden said that Vladimir Putin had previously indicated his belief that the NATO alliance would not remain united in its response to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The president told reporters today that Putin was banking on NATO being split. Instead, the Western alliance has said it will strengthen NATO troops in key Eastern European countries and will reinforce defense systems against chemical and nuclear weapons amid continued Russian aggression in Ukraine. Joining me now is former U.S. Ambassador to NATO, Kay Bailey Hutchison. She's also a senior advisor at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Madam Ambassador, thank you for being with me. I want to start here with your reaction to what we heard from the president saying that there will be a response and that it will depend upon the nature of the use of chemical, biological, or nuclear weapons. What was your interpretation of that?
Well, I thought he was very careful to say that we would respond in kind, and I thought that was a calibrated but correct answer to that question, because if Putin knows that whatever he does is also going to come back to his country, that is a warning, and most certainly something that we will have to back up if he makes such a really erratic decision. I think that it is so important that all of our allies have discussed this eventuality and that there is both a plan for some defense for the Ukrainians if, in fact, some chemical weapon does come in, but also that there would be a retaliation. And I think that that is a very strong stand for a unified NATO and most certainly a message to Putin.
Live pictures on the screen, Madam Ambassador, of President Biden meeting with the European Council. He was there at their regular meeting. So that continues on one side of the screen. Let me continue our conversation. You used the word eventuality, that chemical, biological, nuclear weapons will be used. It is your expectation that that President Putin will order the deployment of those weapons, at least one of them, in Ukraine?
No, not my expectation at all. What my hope is, but hope is not a plan, that Putin would hear what the unified response of the U.S. and NATO is to some eventuality in which this would happen. And if he knows that he is going to have a retaliation, and in fact, I will say that there was a cyber attack earlier this year that was attributed to Russia. It was never said that there was a response, but there was a strong indication that there was a response that was never attributed, but yet did affect Russia in the same way that they had affected a cyber attack in the U.S. So I do think that we are set for this and that Putin should know that that follow through can and will be done.
Let's talk about China. NATO today warned China against economic or military support of Russia in this war against Ukraine. That hasn't happened, but there is this political support in Chinese state media. There is the misinformation, disinformation. China officially is not calling this a war. They supported a resolution that eventually failed at the UN today. How can the West put some pressure on or significant warnings for China to keep them from taking that next step of making good on this no-limit relationship and partnership that they have articulated between Russia and China and supporting them in Ukraine?
I want to say that that is the key question. It is the right question to be asking right now. And I know that that was discussed internally at this NATO summit. What do we do about China? And it's important that we do it in a unified way, because I think President Biden's point that China should know that their economy depends on interaction with the U.S. and Europe, not with Russia. And that's where our sanctions can be very important. And I think it is the key. And I think the other thing you ask, what can we do? The G7, Russia should be kicked out of the G7. Some of the members of the G7 are objecting to that, but it is very important that we draw a red line that Russia not attend a G7 meeting where we would share economic information.
Yeah, I'm sure you met the G20. Russia kicked out of the G7, then G8 after 2014. It's fine.
That would include then India as well, and that's exactly what I meant. And thank you for correcting me, because if we can call out China and India in not allowing a meeting with Russia to sit there at the economic table, it is a very important message.
We already heard from at least one member, the Australian PM, who said that would be a step too far to sit across from him. President Biden says that Russia should be kicked out of the G20. Ambassador Kay Bailey Hutchison, thank you. Much more ahead on our breaking news. Ukrainian forces say they've destroyed a large Russian warship in a southern port city. We're live in Kyiv. Next.
This is the result of one single blast.
3.3 million Ukrainians have now fled this country.
You don't have to go far to find a family who has been displaced.
We just heard an air raid siren ring out.
We run down to cover. It is hard to imagine life returning here.
In Kiev, Dnipro,
Poland.
This is CNN.
When the kids are home and those after-school cravings kick in, that doesn't have to be a recipe for eating junk food. Try whipping up a smoothie for the kiddos instead. They can be tasty and nutritious when made of strawberry. And the antioxidants in strawberries can help boost your immune system. Or try sweet potato to add a little more zing. Try blending sweet potato, cauliflower rice, almond butter, and then add some of your favorite spices like cinnamon and nutmeg or vanilla. This smoothie is packed with protein and fiber that can help kids stay full longer. And avocado toast can make for a great snack for older kids. Avocados are packed with healthy fats and fiber. For younger kids, keep it simple with yogurt and graham crackers or berries and yogurt. Yogurt is a great source for several nutrients, including bone-building calcium and muscle-building protein.
Story, you may be asked to take risks.
These protests are a test for Hamas, where Iraqi troops would pre-position and these Americans would advise them. The protesters are just outside a military base. They're throwing rocks. Any understanding between Israel and Gaza could quickly fall apart again.
You witness persistence, and that's where change happens.
The one thing they have in common is a determination to keep going.
At CNN, we see the devastation caused by natural disasters, famine, and war. We also see how the generosity of others can change lives. You and CNN's Impact Your World can help. Reputable charities that are checked out by CNN. See the difference it makes when you give time, share stories, or donate. By just clicking the button, be a part of the solution. Impact your world.
I am Nigerian by blood, British by birth, and American by residence. It is important to me that those same strands of inclusivity that flow through me are mirrored in the stories that we tell. One World is a place where Africa has an equal seat at the global table alongside Europe, the Americas, and Asia. Every continent has a voice, and where everyone watching has a stake in the global conversation.
One World with Zain Asher, weeknights on CNN.
Don Lemon live from Lviv now. Ukrainian officials claimed success in the Russian-occupied port city of Berdyansk. Video shows fires at the port along with a series of explosions. Ukrainian armed forces say a large Russian warship was destroyed and 2 other ships were damaged. I'm going to get straight to CNN senior international correspondent Sam Kiley. He joins me now from Kyiv. So Sam, what is the significance of this counterattack in this port city?
Well, it's an extremely bold and surprising military move, and I think that's what is so indicative of how the Ukrainians have surprised the Russians, surprised their allies in NATO, currently discussing how much more aid to give to the Ukrainians, a great demonstration of how a little can go a long way. Striking at a Russian warship, setting it on fire, reportedly large numbers of secondary explosions. Those are explosions, Don, caused by the detonations of ammunition or fuel or both on board. Now, this was a town, a port city, very important strategic city to the southwest, on the southwest coast, somehow the Ukrainians were able to strike with a missile. Now, it doesn't affect things strategically, but it will rattle the Russians, and they have actually been able to use anti-tank weapons to shoot smaller vessels. I've seen videos of them doing the similar thing off that Azov coast. Now, what does matter strategically is the town of Mariupol, which, as we know, is under bitter siege with huge numbers of civilians trapped in that location, and yet, notwithstanding the fighting there and the resistance there by Ukrainian forces, they're also able to conduct this kind of hit-and-run move, very characteristic of more of their land operations, all the way up, including here in the capital, Kyiv. Don?
The governor of Kharkiv describing the situation in his city, and I quote here, as a stable situation, even though he said, and I'm going to give you some numbers, that there have been 44 shellings, 140 rocket attacks in just the past day. We also know about 6 people were killed earlier while lining up to receive humanitarian aid. And this is what the governor is now considering normal?
You took the words right out of my mouth there, Don. The idea that a normal situation could be a situation in which civilians queuing for food outside a shopping centre, queuing for food aid, they weren't trying to buy it, they were simply trying to be given it, killed 6 of them in a multiple rocket launch attack. Now, this is, as we've discussed before, an area weapon. It's a very untargeted, unguided missile system. Many, many rockets fired simultaneously with a deliberate intent of killing large numbers of people over a large area of land. And clearly that was the intent yet again in Kharkiv, yet again an attack against civilians, the new normal for a city that is 75% Russian-speaking, 25 miles from the Russian border, the heart, in many ways, in the past of the old intellectual life of the whole of the Soviet Union, a place of 40 universities. Now, the local administration said that over 1,000 residential dwellings and buildings and apartments have been destroyed over the last month of war. Don?
Yeah, and there's a lot. Look, Russian forces continue to attack their attack on Kyiv today, but Ukrainians are pushing back to regain that territory, Sam, in some suburbs around that capital. What are you seeing?
Yeah, they have. The Ukrainians have done a remarkable job, really, again, surprising people with these sometimes hit-and-run guerrilla-type tactics, and at other times, and we saw this certainly over the last few days, very heavy bombardment of Russian positions in the northwest, particularly around the town of Irpin, where yesterday they claimed to have captured some 80% of the territory using, among other things, multiple rocket launching systems. This morning, though, the Ukrainians reporting that the Russians had struck back with those same sorts of weapons hitting civilian areas, of course. In the east, and we spent most of the day in the east, there continue to be the sounds of fighting further east. That's in the area known as Brovary on the right bank of the Dnieper River. That had been, 2 weeks ago, the locus of what was being assumed to be a Russian regrouping effort to try to push into the city. Again, the Ukrainians believe that they've pushed the Russians back, but the real issue for them now, and there's been signs of this emerging, is that there is now a further troop build-up, more logistics, more armor, Russian armor this is, appearing inside Belarusian territory, and continued talk of the Belarusians joining the fight on the side of the Russians, and that could be disastrous for the Ukrainians. They are fighting hard, they are fighting well using the new NATO weapons, but they do not have an infinity of troops, Don.
Yeah, so the Belarusian soldiers would help the Russians. Sam Cowley, thank you. I appreciate it. Victor, that's the latest from the region. I'm going to throw it back to you in New York.
All right, Don, thank you. Let's discuss with CNN military analyst and retired Air Force Colonel Cedric Leighton. Colonel Leighton, good to see you. Let's pick up where Don and Sam left off. The role of this movement of weapons, other military equipment into Belarus, what's that indicate to you?
Well, it indicates to me, Victor, that it's possible preparation for either Russian troops to move into Belarus, which I don't think is the case, but it could happen, and then move forward from there into Ukraine, or for Belarusian troops to use that equipment and move forward into Ukraine. Either one of these really means that the theater of war has expanded a bit to include the border area between Belarus and Ukraine, and we could see the Belarusian troops or Russian troops going through Belarus being used to either go again toward Kyiv or going toward the western part of Ukraine, such as Lviv, where Don is right now.
Today, President Zelensky told NATO leaders through this virtual address that Russian forces deployed phosphorus in one town there, and people were killed, including children. What's the significance of that? Is it considered a chemical weapon? No?
Depends on how it's used, Victor, and it's it can be used as a smokescreen, and that's a legitimate use in military conflicts. But if it's used to target people, it is actually considered illegal, and it is because it does burn, and it leaves some very serious burns on victims. It can potentially kill them, affecting the internal organs. So it is not only a dangerous weapon, but a very lethal weapon, and that kind of use is banned under international law.
Okay. We saw this video of a Russian warship near the port city of Berdyansk. Ukrainian officials say that they took out this ship. Any win for them is a good one, obviously. But what's the strategic value, do you think, of what we're watching now, taking out this ship at this location?
So this location is actually pretty close to Mariupol. It's on the Sea of Azov, and it kind of makes it difficult for the Russians to move in and out of the port of Berdyansk, and that's significant because that is one of the areas that they're using as a staging area to get that land bridge that we've talked about before. So anything that stymies or hinders the Russian efforts in the south is good news for Ukraine, because it prevents, or at least it's working toward preventing, the creation of that land bridge or any potential moves into areas to the west, such as Odessa. So it's a very, very important effort by the tactical effort by the Ukrainians, and certainly very spectacular to watch, to say the least.
And certainly spectacular to watch. This video, remarkable. Let me ask you for your take on the inability of the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, the Secretary of Defense, to be able to get their counterparts, their Russian counterparts, on the phone. They haven't spoken one-to-one since weeks before the invasion.
Yeah, it sounds a little bit like the North Koreans that often don't pick up the line, the military connection that we have with them on the demilitarized zone in Korea. And in this case, silence is not golden. It's, you know, Victor, it's one of these aspects of the relationship between Russia. I remember that even at the height of the Cold War, towards the end of it, there would always be contact with the Russians or with the Soviets at that time. There was no effort that either side made to stop those kinds of communications most of the time. So it was good, you know, it was good at that time, but this is a very bad development.
Yeah, even then communications weren't this poor. Colonel Cedric Leighton, thank you. Ukraine's armed forces say Russia is transferring weapons and equipment to Belarus. As we just discussed, they say it's part of Russia's planned offensive aimed at encircling the capital. Up next, we'll speak to a U.S. citizen now in Ukraine's capital who's there to defend the homeland. And Russia has so far been unable to take full control of Ukrainian airspace, thanks in part to the expertise of Ukrainian fighter pilots trained by Americans. And CNN spoke to 2 pilots. Hear what they say is the biggest need. Next.
Connect the world with Becky Anderson.
It all starts here. Changing, fighting, creating, connecting. That's why we're here. We live here, we work here, we're from here, and we'll go wherever the story takes us.
I'm Becky Anderson in Tehran. We are in Jerusalem.
Real news that shapes our world. Exploring not just what's going on, but why.
I just want to press you on one further point.
Getting perspective on this region from this region. Places that many of us know, but few of us get to see. Observing countries on the move, still rooted in tradition. It all starts here, and that's why we're here, bringing you the world from our Middle Eastern hub.
Connect the world with Becky Anderson, Monday through Friday on CNN.
There, another shot.
Yeah, the shields have gone back up again.
They called for backup and none has arrived.
It's very nice to meet you. I wish you the best.
Coronavirus. To get daily news updates in your inbox, sign up for the CNN newsletter. Coronavirus. Fact versus fiction.
We decided a few years ago to set out on a journey which we call Enable a Fossil-Free Living within 1 generation. And you can see all around Europe that the competitive situation is shifting away from fossil fuels and into renewables and into more nuclear power. So you can see that there's a lot of innovation going on around the fossil-free technologies. And you can also clearly see that the customer demand is shifting. And today, I think we can see that companies and customers are actually moving much faster than nations or global initiatives. So I think that this is a business strategy for us. It's not a sustainability strategy first and foremost. It's a business strategy and it is sustainable. But we can clearly see that through this transformation, we are actually getting increasingly competitive.
I'm Vedika Sood in New Delhi, and this is CNN.
Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky today told NATO leaders that he needs just 1% of their firepower for the war against Russia, but the U.S. is still opposed to sending fighter jets to Ukraine. That's according to a senior U.S. official. Earlier today, CNN's John Berman spoke to 2 fighter pilots about their battle against Russian forces. Here's what one pilot, whose call sign, by the way, is Juice, had to say about the need for more military equipment.
Using this baby, I'm not efficient. I'm not effective against Russian jets, against Russian fighters. So we need something more advanced, something modern. We are pushing them from our border, from our front lines, but we couldn't gain real full air superiority.
Well, let's discuss now with Miro Popovich. He is a dual U.S.-Ukrainian citizen fighting in his homeland of Ukraine. He's also a U.S. Army veteran, and we're happy to have you, Miro. Thank you so much. What type of equipment do you and other Ukrainian forces need to successfully fight the Russians, whether in the air or on the ground?
Well, hi, Don. First of all, thank you for having me. And what kind of equipment? First of all, we need for NATO to close our sky. This is #1 priority because they keep bombing our civilian neighborhoods. They keep bombing our schools, bomb shelters, and it's really hard to operate when you have these, it's really hard for a soldier to go to war knowing that his family is being bombed at this very moment at the bomb shelter. So I think that's the #1 priority. To anti-missiles and anti-aircraft. Regarding the ground forces, as you know, we and Ukrainian military are doing pretty well against tanks and armored vehicles and their troops. We're just destroying them, but air defense is lacking.
Well, listen, you're at an impasse when it comes to the no-fly zone. You mentioned it. Many people I interview mention it. I've spoken to the Secretary of Defense. He said no. The President of the United States has said no. I listened to the head of NATO today. No. So what do you say to your fellow American citizens who fear that that would trigger a wider, perhaps a nuclear war, not only to the United States, but also to members of NATO who fear the same thing? What do you say to them?
What do I say to them? Well, of course, I cannot promise that it will not trigger it. But right now, Ukraine is showing to the whole world that Russia is not as strong as they want the world to seem. They're not as strong. Ukraine is 28 times smaller than Russia, and we're just kicking their asses, literally. Of course, Putin and whoever in Russia, they can in agony scream like we're gonna use nuclear weapons and stuff. You know what? I don't think they will, because first of all, it's gonna destroy them. It's a suicide. I think they're bluffing, and I'm not asking for NATO to start war with Russia. I'm asking NATO and we asking them to stop all the missiles that coming towards the Ukraine, to stop those missiles, not to attack Russia, but to stop their missiles that coming to our bomb shelters, schools, theaters, etc. So To my fellow Americans, I love you, and every single the support that we received, that I received, thank you so much. And I'm very happy to be an American citizen as well, because America is number one.
So we've talked about the possibility using chemical weapons is real and warns that the U.S. will respond if Russia uses them. How concerned are you about that?
Don, chemical weapons, I'm very concerned. When I served in the U.S. Army, we went through a gas chamber. So the training sort of shows you the impact and how the chemical weapons work. It was painful, but it was not even a lethal chemical weapons, just a training. So I know how painful it is. And I've seen images from, I believe, from Syria or somewhere else where the chemical weapons were used. And it's gruesome. And I'm very concerned. I ordered my gas mask from the States. It must arrive in like a week or so. Just in case, I order a gas mask with filters to be ready for that. And hopefully they don't do that because, as you know, Russia, they use the same style of approach. They use something and then they're gonna say that we did it to ourselves. They used chemical weapons to themselves, and of course it's a lie. So hopefully they don't do that, and hopefully people. I mean, I know Putin is crazy. He's a crazy dude. Hopefully the people that below him, they sort of have a clearer mind and they understand that. I mean, this war has no sense, and chemical weapons. That's hopefully, if this happens, hopefully President Biden will keep his word and respond.
Yeah. The question is, what will that response be? Mira Popovich, thank you very much. Please be safe.
Yeah.
So, Victor, listen, the U.S. and NATO, they're walking a tightrope. I mean, when you're talking about nuclear, the possibility of nuclear and chemical weapons, no one wants to play around with that.
Yeah, certainly does not. The president says that there will be a response. Of course, everyone hopes that there won't have to be. Don in Lviv, thank you. Millions of people have left Ukraine over the last month. For some, the cost has been unimaginable. CNN spoke with a 15-year-old boy. He was forced from his home, barely managed to get out, and he lost his mother. His story, just ahead.
It really only takes a few moments to gain an appreciation of just how tough it is out here. They've been coming across sniper fire, gunfire, mortar rounds. You can see really just how intense it is here.
We have to wrap it up right now. Quite anxious about spending too much time on scene.
Those are the kids really struggling to get away.
They feel like they won't be able to outrun the war.
They thought the whole border was open. People are just trying to bust through towards what they think is going to be a better life. These nurses, these doctors really have nerves of steel.
We can't help but be struck by how interconnected our world is.
Arwa Damon, CNN.
Since the start of this war, 1 month ago, half of Ukraine's kids have been forced to leave their homes. Half. That's according to UNICEF. Every day, there's more destruction from Russian attacks, impacts on Ukrainian cities and people. And now in Chernihiv, there's new video that shows the damage after weeks of Russian shelling. This morning, my colleague John Berman spoke with a 15-year-old from that city. He was forced from his home. He barely got out of the city with his life, but he lost his mother. Listen to this.
When doctors drive me about the hospital, I looking for some people from territorial defense or police to find my father.
You and your father, are you okay in your hearts?
Father is hard. You understand, your wife is dead and you look to your son. I can't stand up without you understand. I think до мене ще повністю не дійшло.
And myself, I think I haven't realized everything to its full extent.
What do you want the world to know about your mother?
Що б ти хотів, щоб світ дізнався про тебе?
Sorry.
I'm sorry.
Співчуваю, справді.
Excuse me. Thank you. Хочу знати, що мама була дуже.
I want them to know that my mother was a very beautiful woman.
І любила чистоту і порядок.
She always liked things to be tidy and clean, and my father and I, we always supported, we understood that and supported her. And right now it's very difficult without mother.
She has a beautiful and brave son.
Має дуже красивого і дуже хороброго сина.
And I'm so sorry you've gone through this.
15. Well, after all of this, Andrei says that he plans to return to his hometown once the war is over. For more information about how you can help humanitarian efforts in Ukraine, go to cnn.com/impact. President Biden is rallying the West behind a strategy to confront Vladimir Putin. Moments ago, he suggested ousting Russia from the G20. Much more on our breaking news ahead.
Air quality update in association with Copernicus, Europe's eyes on Earth. Air quality update in association with Copernicus, Europe's eyes on Earth.
I'm Ivan Watson in Hong Kong, and this is CNN.
To open doors, to develop contacts, and to unlock secrets, it takes trust.
It was the first time he really came out of his shell in front of a camera.
Trust that you'll listen.
So great that you're here today. It just highlights what's making a difference.
That you'll be honest.
I don't want to pry, but what sort of conversations do you have with them?
Trust that you'll be accurate and you'll be fair.
It was an unprecedented move. Very eerie. All the roads have been closed off.
Describe the scene that you arrived to.
The Apache attack helicopter. This is what Captain Wales has been flying.
Do you want talks with them?
What is the point of talking now?
Huge amounts of police support coming into this protest.
We continue to monitor the government in crisis.
This was the Duchess's first news interview.
Rare access indeed.
That's what it's all about. Max Foster, CNN.
You can help the refugees from Ukraine. Join the over 70,000 who've already raised millions for food, shelter, and more. Explore cnn.com/impact. Click to take action.
Hey, I'm Anderson Cooper. I'm excited to let you know that my digital show Full Circle is back. You can watch every Monday, Tuesday, and Friday, 6 p.m. live Eastern Time or anytime on demand. And to make sure you never miss a show, you can get alerts on every episode via the CNN app. I'll see you then.
An ex-New York prosecutor who investigated former President Trump says Trump is guilty of numerous felonies. In his resignation letter last month, Mark Pomerantz wrote, "The team that has been investigating Mr. Trump harbors no doubt about whether he committed crimes. He did." Pomerantz says Trump lied about his personal finances. He's one of two prosecutors who resigned after the Manhattan District Attorney said he was not ready to move forward with criminal charges. The DA's office says the investigation is ongoing. All right, here's some really good news. Weekly jobless claims fell to a level the U.S. hasn't seen since the Nixon administration. Just 187,000 people filed for first-time unemployment benefits last week. Economists expected 210,000. The last time the weekly number was that low, September 6, 1969. In another encouraging sign, the number of people filing for continuing unemployment fell to the lowest level since January 3, 1970. Good news. The Lead with Jake Tapper starts after a break.